what we're looking at here is a demo project. We've got some analytics on the right-hand side. We've got a breakdown between the two sites that we're looking at, so Fig Street and Wattle Street. You could obviously do that by scenario as well. So if you've got multiple scenarios on the one site, you can look at the comparison between those two or multiple scenarios that you're looking at in terms of the yield and a lot of these metrics that are coming out. Jumping across to the next tab, this is where the breakdown happens, and I've sort of really broken it down into the sort of fundamentals here. So we've got the dwelling and yield mix, which is broken down by apartment type, and you can see that count and the total here surfacing. We've got a landscaped area, population and jobs jumping back up here to the top, and the GFA with a breakdown of the retail versus residential GFA. So we can break down that information as well. We're not limited to, there's various filters that we can apply onto the usages, or we can separate them out via usages. So we're only searching for the residential usage or the retail usage. And that's how we can bring only that GFA into this calculation. And then another filter is by the layer. So we're making sure that only the retail GFA that is hosted on this Fig Street proposal layer is being calculated here. And we will step through that more in a second. There's some cost breakdown here as well. Keep in mind, they are just sort of fictitious costs that I've dropped in. And I'm not a quantity surveyor or anything like that. And then I've broken down some cost per square meters, which is basically a breakdown of how we're arriving at some of these costs that we see here. It's based off a square meter rate that I've applied here under the superstructure tab, and we can sort of jump in and change that at any time. So if this was to change to 950, we save those changes, we see that update, and it will then reflect in the calculation of the cost here as well. So there's a few ways. It depends how much time you're willing to invest and what you're looking at, but it's a highly configurable tool, analytics, that we basically, a lot of the time you're working on these projects, you have an Excel spreadsheet that's working in conjunction with your project, and it's a manual process of making sure that's updated and relates to your project. So this is a way to bring that all together into a central platform, so you know that information is the latest as per the design you see on the screen. All right, so let's jump across to the proper demo that I have set up. So I just did a little bit of work in the background before this session, just to set up a bit of a multiple site scenario that we're looking at in terms of a new development here in Balmain, sort of near White Bay Terminal, for those of you that are familiar with Sydney. So what I've done here is, just to give you a bit of an idea, I've set up a multitude of sites here. We've got site A, and I've broken it down by the building and the boundary. And this becomes important in analytics when you're looking at multiple FSRs. So if you are looking at a single site, so let's say an individual lot over here, your FSR in the urban tab will be derived from your project boundary. So if your project boundary captures your site boundary, then you can have confidence that that FSR is correct. But it makes sense that when you are designing multiple sites, your site boundary is usually quite large. A lot of the time, it doesn't actually relate to the sites. Like if I'm doing multiple sites, I'll just draw a site boundary sort of in a random location around it. And what that does is just act as a locating beacon for where in the world you're drawing on the map in Giraffe. And so when we look at multiple sites, we actually have to use a slightly different technique, and that's creating a parcel usage. So you've already got a usage in your project. When you start a new project, you'll see under the usage tabs that you have parcel already. So if I select a rectangle here, start to draw, jump over to my usage, type in parcel, I've got that parcel typology as well already added in there. And the benefit of that is we then assign or treat that as the project boundary, and we can derive an FSR from that based on the building that we have located on that site as well. And we can do this because they are linked in this grouped layer that we have here on the left-hand side. So that'll make a little bit more sense as we go. But yeah, so looking to the right-hand side, for those of you who may not be familiar, we have like an urban tab and an analytics tab. The urban tab gives you an overview. As you can see here on the right, you've got a GFA, you've got a breakdown of the usages, and they sort of highlight as you hover over the top of them. We've got an FSR, some other information, and we've got a yield calculation that's being pulled out as well. So this information is hard-coded in Giraffe. You can't customize what's displayed here. Obviously, it's all linked to what you draw on the map, but we can't configure this in any way. And so that's when we move into analytics. And this is where we can apply and configure those metrics in order to pull out like what we saw previously, the costs or any of the yield, whatever's important to us about a project. This is where we can start to play with that data. You will notice that there's a breakdown areas by layer up the top as well. So this you can see is populated, and we've got site B building and a breakdown for each layer. This isn't really helpful for me at the moment. So I'm actually going to hide this information because I just want to focus on the analytics that I can see below. So what we can do there is if I navigate into analytics, and then there's a configure tab up the top. So this is where we control a lot of the formulas, the usages, the tabs, and all of that that's happening behind the scenes. And I will jump down to settings here. And so settings is where you can control what's visible on the right-hand side here. So I'm just going to toggle off area type chart here. And you'll see that that's in the background, that sort of disappeared. So now if I close this, we don't have that area by layer breakdown at the top. So for my workflow, I'm not interested in looking at that. So I'm going to remove it. And I've probably jumped a step as well. So when you first open analytics, it'll ask you if you want to start with a template or if you want to start from scratch. So I encourage you to start from a template because it gives you an idea of what you can calculate in Giraffe. And then you can sort of configure that, remove what you don't want, and really start to like edit and try and break it, I guess, is what you're doing there. It gives you something to start with, and then you can work backwards. But if you're confident you know what you're doing, feel free to start from blank and you can set that out as you like. So the hierarchy that we have here on the right-hand side as well is we've got the tabs up the top, which I mentioned earlier. And then within each tab, we've got categories. So if I collapse these categories, we've got 4 categories in this tab. And then within each of the categories, we have what's called measures or calculations. So each of these are performing a calculation in order to return a result. So we can see here that the landscaped area is currently calculating 6,500 because of this community park that we have on the left-hand side. And if I start to edit that, we see that adjust. However, what it is doing is calculating everything all together at once, which is not what we want to achieve in this instance. We've got multiple sites, so we want to sort of break that down and look at that landscaped area, for example, across the different sites that we have here. So let's navigate back up to settings. So again, or configure, this is where we control how the visibility is happening here on the screen. And if I navigate up to settings or configure, I'm going to jump down to, actually, before I do this, apologies, I'm going to group them. So the group by at the top here, this is why we've grouped them in a layer group and sort of the building and boundary together, is because we can actually separate them out in terms of the analytics through their layer group. So you can absolutely do a layer if that's what you're looking for. If you've just got 3 layers, you don't have sort of a whole bunch of sites and you want to separate that information out that way, you can do that. But what we're going to do is separate it by layer group, and we can drag this panel out, which is lovely. And we've got our multiple sites that are stacked across the top here. So we do have one that's undefined, and I don't really want to include that. So we can control the visibility again, going to configure. I'm going to jump up to here, go down to my settings, and there's one here that says no layer group. So I'm going to toggle that one on so it'll hide that group. And then I'm just going to close out of this. And now we can see that undefined group is gone. And I'm going to try something here, which I'm not sure if it'll work, but let's see if I can drag this. Yes, very good. So you can drag the columns, which is great because it was a little bit out of order there. So we can drag them to rearrange. So I've now got my sites in order, and we can see this information has been separated out now. So there's a net building area. Each of them are different across my 4 sites that I have here. Building footprint. These are obviously pretty similar for site B and C. And the site area we've got looks pretty similar. And I say similar, it's exactly the same. So what we need to do there is we need to actually adjust this site area. So we are calculating the correct parcel usage is what we want to look for here. So to edit a measure, we can very simply just click on it. So if I click on this, this brings up the spreadsheet behind the scenes, basically, the formula that's calculating the number that we see. And what it's saying is it's looking for the site area, the site total area. And this is being driven from the property that's attached to the site boundary that we originally created. I created it prior to this session, but it's attached to, if I zoom out and I go edit project boundary, this is what it's drawing on. So you can see it's 19820, and I think there's probably a discrepancy there. But if I hit done there, it's pulling in that site area for all of the information here, but that's not what we want. We want to get the gross area of these parcel usages. So the way we do that, we can come in here, site area, we can leave that as the name, square meters is fine. I'm going to leave all of this, but I want to change this to a property. So on the components for A, we want to change that to a property because we want to grab the property of a usage, and we want to select that usage or filter by usage first. So we want to just locate all the usages, and now we want to select the parcel usage within that. So now I've grabbed the parcel usage, I'm filtering that information, and the property I want to search for that's attached to that is the gross area, meters squared. And now if I save these changes, we can see that it's gone through now and updated by layer group because we have a parcel or a boundary parcel in each layer group, and it's grabbed the gross area of that and is now using that as our site area for each of these sites. So we can see they're all different. And if I grab site D here and we make changes, that is all updating as expected. So there is the question about the FSR. So the FSR will also be calculated based on that previous site total area. So we need to make an adjustment there as well. So we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to grab a property here. We're going to grab a filter, the usage, and we're going to grab parcel. And I'm just thinking we may actually just be able to grab that measure straight away, which might be easier. So instead of this, apologies, let's grab the measure and let's look for site area. And if I save those changes, Yes, we can see that that's updated now, and that's based on the site area. So let's just check that. I'm grabbing site D, so we're looking over here, and if I increase the size, we can see the site area is changing, and so is the FSR, which is great. And if we grab the building area, we can see that that is also updating as well. So that's all working as intended, and I'm happy with that. All right, so we've got our 4 sites. We've sort of broken that down into some key metrics that we're looking at here. And let's say we want to add an additional site. And so I'm just going to talk through that process for site E here on the end. All right, so I'm going to navigate into 2D mode. And just a little tip as I sort of go through as well and think of them. I have aligned my grid. So you can see here, I've got a grid turned on, and I've actually edited my grid so it aligns with that project, that street, Robert Street along there. And you can do that by navigating to, snap and grid, and then you can click edit grid here. And that will allow you to basically select your starting point and end point of that line that you want to reorientate your drawing. Basically, it allows for a much easier drawing situation, which is very helpful. Okay, so I've got the grid toggled on, which is nice. I'm going to just hit P on my keyboard, or you can go up and grab polygon here, and I'm just going to very quickly sort of hold S and snap around my site. Close to finish, hit Y on my keyboard to match properties, matching that parcel data. We have also drawn on the site C building layer. So that's something we need to set up as well. We need to create our new layers. I'm going to create 2 more drawing layers, and this is going to be site E boundary. And then we're going to grab this one, site E building. And we're going to drag them, group them together, site E. Happy with that. And I'm going to drag this down so it's under site D. Collapse that one. And I want to grab this parcel that I just drew, make sure that is on site E boundary. And now I can start drawing on my site. So let's just very quickly create geometry from my site, and then start. Oh, let's do that. There's a few too many angles on there, so I'm gonna have to play around with that a little bit too much. So let's just grab the neighboring site, hold Option or Alt to drag across, and then we'll have to drag that up, and maybe we want to something like that. And we need to make sure all of this is on site E building. So again, jumping across here, making sure it's on the correct layer. Site E building is my active drawing layer. So I'm going to jump up here and just drop some landscape in. Drop that in there. And so now we've got our, let's make it a little bit lower. So we can give our neighbors a bit of a view to the harbour bridge. Okay, so we've got our new site E, and we can see that straight away has populated in our analytics on the right-hand side. So you'll notice with this one, because we did add some landscaping in, none of the others actually have landscaping. That's just sort of a thoroughfare between sites. This one has a landscaped area that's been added. It's calculated a lot of the information already. The site FSR looks to be right. We sort of reduced that quite a lot. So yep, that's all still linked. And we've got our total dwellings and jobs as well coming out of that information. So the jobs that we see here, you can see that site A is 0, and that's because what we're filtering for there is by the usage. And The usage it's looking for is retail or of that nature. And there is only a residential usage on site A. So we can see site A is actually generating 0 jobs for that area. So that is correct. All right. So let's look at a situation where we wanted to add often the case is with a residential development like this one on the corner, we may want to sort of add a ground floor, and that often has a different floor to floor. So this is sort of going away from analytics as well for a second, but just to talk through a bit of this workflow around what we're discussing. So, and then we are talking on usages as well. So this is sort of linked in there. The way we can do that is you can absolutely create a separate usage that could be called residential ground floor. So we could clone that and you could have a separate usage. But because we want to keep all of that residential usage typology flowing through into analytics without having to update filters, because if we were to add a new usage in here, we'd have to make sure the filters are correct in, let's say, building area, I think. I haven't actually split it out in terms of the residential GFA and retail GFA. But if we split that out, we'd be filtering by the usage. And let's actually jump in and do that now. So let's say this is retail GFA. We're looking at a square meters. I'm going to add a filter. So again, we're looking at a usage filter. And this is more often than not is you're going to select usage as the filter here. And then what you're going to do is search for, let's say, retail. We're going to grab that and we're going to look for the gross area. And we're also going to grab the efficiency. So while we're grabbing the gross area of that usage, there's always an efficiency that's being applied. So you're not going to get that as your GFA, obviously. So we're going to add another component and we're going to actually pull out the efficiency property that's attached to the retail usage. So now if I do sort of my formula, so if I'm going to do A multiplied by B, so my gross area multiplied that efficiency of 0.9 by the looks of it here, and that will sort of give me my GFA. So if I save those changes now, we can see my retail GFA is calculated here. And if I grab my retail usage and we go into the usage editor, this is where that property is being extracted from. So I've got the efficiency here. We saw that that was 90. And so I could jump in here and adjust that to say, let's say it's more like 95. And then when I hit enter and save, we can see that those numbers updated on the right-hand side. So the best way to control these metrics, so you don't have to, or these analytics, so you don't have to jump in each time and update them, is through a usage. So whenever you update in the usage, anytime that usage is referenced in any of these calculations, it will all update and flow through. So that's what I would encourage. So rather than retail GFA, rather than doing a calculation here that's multiplied by 0.9 because you know it's a 90% efficiency, we would encourage you to actually add that as a property to the usage, and you can then pull that out. So you're controlling any of those changes from one place, because analytics can get extremely confusing. If you're building out a large project, you've got multiple options and scenarios. It can get very, very complex very quickly. So I've definitely got lost a number of times in it. Okay, so this is where we're controlling that retail usage. And let's just add another one just to sort of reiterate that. So I could jump in here. I can actually duplicate that. So if you know that the measure that you want to create is similar to one, you can just jump in here, hit duplicate, and then we can change that to residential. and we'll remove copy. We'll change the filter. You need to make sure that the filter is residential. And it's still grabbing those properties that are attached to the usage that we're referencing here. So you can see that it's grabbing that residential usage. And I think where I started with this conversation is when you duplicate your usages. So you might have a residential 2 or a residential ground floor if it's got a different floor to floor height, where I started. It would be excluded from this calculation unless you added it into your filter. So whenever you add additional usages, you need to make sure that they're captured within your analytics and your filters for that GFA. And with the ground floor to floor example that I was using, having a different height, we can there's 2 ways you could do that. You could do that as a separate usage, or what we could do, if I do a copy paste here, and they're not stacking because we're not on the right layer. So I need to make sure site A building layer, copy paste that on top of each other. And I'm going to drop that down to just a single ground floor, making sure the stack order is correct. And so you can't notice, but if I drag this out, we've got an independent, unique ground floor that's happening here. And we want this to be a different floor to floor height. So what we can do is actually add a property. So if we add a property over that feature that we drew, it overrides the usage. So let's show that. If I jump in here and let's say height, if I grab height, we can see here that it's defaulted to 10 meters for some reason. And that's jumped up and it's overridden the 3.6 or whichever that floor to floor height was on the original residential usage. So what we've done here is apply an override, and we can then start to change that. So if that's 4.5, we hit OK. It's still a residential usage, so it's still all flowing back to here, and we can see any of those changes are updating the residential GFA here in site A. So that's nice. We didn't have to make any changes to the filter. And at any time, if we decide to change some of those override properties that we have, we can just simply delete them. And that will then default back to the original, the original usage property that we had. Okay, so that was just a little bit of a added information. The next item I wanted to talk to is the efficiency, I guess. And we already briefly spoke about that, but I've got site C here as an example. So we've got this sort of scenario that I've created here is one where we're trying to achieve ventilation. We've got a dual core situation here, and maybe we have cross-through apartments through the middle here. And so we know with that type of design that the efficiency is going to be lower than a regular apartment with a single core and all of that consolidated. So what we can do is break that down. In this case, we would create an additional usage. At least that would be my suggestion, is we'd come in here to the usage editor. We want to keep this original residential usage. We don't want to make changes to that because we have that referenced elsewhere in the project. But we do want to clone it. So I'm going to clone that usage. And if we call this residential, what's maybe dual core. Okay, so we've got our new usage here. We can jump in and let's drop the efficiency down to 70%. There's a number of other properties that we can edit in here, and I will do that in a second. But I just want to let's change the color just so we can see a little bit of a difference there. And that's a little bit ugly, but that's all right. And then we'll hit save. So if I close my usage editor now, nothing will have changed, but we can now jump into, so let's say this one here, we want to change that usage now. It's still the original usage, but if we search in the drop down now, we can see the new usage that I created, residential dual core. So I can select that. We get that horrible color. So I'm going to jump in and change that right away. Let's give it a... Let's look at an orange. Not great, but we'll go with it. So now we've got our different usage that's applied here because we have that different efficiency being calculated. And what we can do, we will need to add the filter or add this usage to the filter. So if we jump back into residential GFA, this is where that calculation is happening. It's pulling out the area and the efficiency. So we don't have to worry about that because our new usage, we already adjusted the efficiency and it's going to pull that property out. But we do have to update the usage here. And now if I select, what it'll display here is all the active usages that you have currently on the map. So if you don't see all of them here, that's because it's not placed on the map. And if I grab residential dual core, and we save those changes, we can now see that site C's information is back. Previously, it was zeroed out there. So I'm not sure if you noticed that, but any changes that we make updating as expected. So that's the way we would sort of tackle that when you're dealing with different types with different efficiencies. We would do it like that. All right. So one more thing, I haven't checked the chat. Apologies. Was there any questions at all? Drop them in the chat, or put your hand up. Apologies for not checking that earlier. All right. So now what we're going to do is add another property to a custom property to our dwelling. So let's say this dwelling here on site B, we actually want to measure, if I go into the usage editor, we're looking at a number of things here. So if I scroll down to the bottom, we've got user generated properties. So I've got a hard cost there, soft cost, sale price, net rent, and facade costs that are all being calculated. But let's say that we want to look at the annual energy consumption for this dwelling. So it's not currently there, but what we can do is add additional properties. So if I add a property, and remembering we are editing the usage, so even though we only selected site C, the building on site C, we're editing that residential usage across all of our sites. So this property will be added and updated across all of those sites. And what we'll see is a new metric populate on the right-hand side once we've finished here. So let's type annual energy consumption. So I'm going to, hopefully that added it. Yep. So you can add properties, even though they're not listed here. You could type in testing demo, for example, and you can create a new usage. And I think the reason it didn't bring this up before is because I'd previously created an annual energy consumption. So that's why we didn't see this window pop up. But basically, you select what input type you want, the name, some settings, and then a default value here. A lot of this you can just leave as it's displayed. And I usually just hit save here. And then now we can see that property added to the end of the list down the bottom here. You can easily delete them as well. So I can delete that testing demo. Annual energy consumption. I'm going to look at kilowatt hours for this. So let's put 150 kilowatt hours per square meter annually is what we're looking at. So I'm going to adjust that there. Scroll back up the top, hit save all my changes now. Close my usage editor. And we're going to go back over to my analytics, and we can drag that out. I'm going to add let's add a new category. So you can add a new tab here as well. So this could be, if I added a new tab, this could be sustainability, create a new tab, and let's go into that tab. No, I might want to keep, I want to keep it in this original tab just so we can see all the information together. But you can create a new tab. You can delete tabs as well. And I'm going to navigate down to the bottom. We're going to add a new category, and let's call this energy create. So we get a nice new category that's added down here. You can sort of customize that as well. So if I click on that directly, you can edit the category, change the text, and which tab it appears in as well. So it's currently just in the default tab. So let's say we do want it in sustainability as well. And let's just hit save here. Close out of that. So we've got energy here. And if I jump across to sustainability, it's also displayed here. And now we want to add a measure. So I'm going to add a measure, the little plus icon on the right-hand side. This brings up that Excel formula sheet. And this is where we can add our, or we can draw upon our new property that we created. So let's call this annual energy consumption. We want kilowatt hours. So I don't know if it's not listed here, but that's fine. We can create our own custom unit. And so I'm just going to select kilowatt hours, precision, 2 decimal places is fine. Details, tags, you can sort of leave these two, that's fine. Filter, do we need a filter? No, we're going to filter by, we're going to leave the filter for now. And we're going to grab the property. So we're going to search for, there it is at the top, annual energy consumption. And so if I type in A here, we can see that it's 150. So it's already referencing that, that property that we attached, but we want to make an additional calculation. I guess we want to add more to it. We want to multiply that by the residential GFA, which it's picking up the retail as well. So what we can do there is we might actually add a filter on this to make sure that it's only grabbing the residential typologies. And now if we add another property, we're going to look for the measure, which is the residential GFA. Going to grab that. And what we want to do is an A times B. So we're multiplying the annual energy consumption, which was 150 kilowatt hours per year. And then we're multiplying that by the residential GFA. We're getting a result, a preview here. So that's how you know it's working. And if we hit OK, we now get our new metric that's annual energy consumption. We can see the units that we added here, the customized units. And we can see that each of these are populating a different result. Site C is not showing anything, and that's because we didn't include the new usage in our filter. So we can jump back in here, jump into the filter and select residential dual core, save those changes. And I know why, because we didn't add the property to that usage. So let's quickly jump into usage editor, add property, annual energy consumption. We'll add that in here. And let's 150. Save those changes, and yes, it's all working. So with each of these changes, again, it's all dynamically linked, which is great. And now we're looking at the annual energy consumption across all of our sites, or multiple scenarios. We could also do that. So you can imagine here that you're really limited by, well, there's very little limitations because it is highly configurable. So as long as you're drawing on a square meter of what you're building in terms of a rate, you can extrapolate that out into a cost, a yield, jobs, all of that. So this is jobs is just based off, I think it's a 50 square meter 50 square meters of retail usage equates to a job. And we can check that we've got area per job as a property. So we can actually sort of jump in and look at the property area per job. Okay. So let's jump into the usage. Let's edit that and look for area per job. So here we are. We've got 30. So for every 30 square meters, it's calculating a single job. So